And welcome everybody to another Smart Money Circle update. I'm Adam Sarhan. With me today is Lewis Black, who's CEO, President, and founder of Almonty Industries. Lewis, thank you so much and welcome to the Smart Money Circle.
Thank you for having me, Adam. Thank you.
So Lewis, I always like to begin by asking, can you please tell us a little about your story and your journey, how you got to where you are today, please?
I think like any journey, the start was a little convoluted because you find your direction as you go. So you try to follow a passion rather than a course, and the passion ends up where it ends up. Sometimes it ends up very successfully commercially, and sometimes it ends up very successfully in your spirit or amalgamation of both. So I've traveled the world extensively. I've always been fascinated by creating something. I mean, something with my hands, something that actually made a difference.
Yeah.
And it's a rather unusual story, but a dear friend of mine from school, he in fact bizarrely won a mine in a card game in Thailand.
Oh wow.
He was a very eccentric. He's not with us any longer, but he was always a very eccentric explorer. And it wasn't really a mine. It was 3 guys and a couple of tables. And it was in a product that was called tungsten. And he didn't know that. He thought it was iron ore, but he thought it was very heavy for iron. And I started to research it. And we're going back more than 20 years. And I was fascinated. It completely grabbed me, because here was a metal that was in every part of your life, technical and technology. And you use so little of it at the end that the price was irrelevant. It was about availability. And so suddenly I thought this, and it was extremely, it was an extreme art to process it. So straight away, I was fascinated. And that's how my journey began. And I think, as my father would say, may he rest in peace, better to be lucky than smart. And it turned into a opportunity to acquire the world's oldest tungsten mine, which was in Portugal, which had 5 generations of experience. And then I was off to the races.
Wow, I love it. Though it was almost love at first sight, if that makes sense.
Anything that is not driven by price, but by supply,
yeah,
it has to be extraordinarily interesting. Now,
100%.
There's been some pitfalls, of course, on the way, because that's a very pure way of looking at it economically. So there is I will expand upon that a bit later, I think.
Okay, wonderful. So can you tell us about your business, please, some general overview and some competitive advantages?
Well, we are the largest tungsten producer outside of China. China and Russia accounts for 90% of the world's tungsten. Oh, wow. Tungsten is used in, as I said, every part of your economy, every part, whether it be automotive, aerospace, defense, medical, semiconductors, battery anodes and cathodes, solar panels, the screens in your telephones and televisions. It's in everything. It's totally dominated by China. It was done so because in the 80s they arrived, and it wasn't just tungsten, but the number of other metals. It was free material for everybody. And we started the mid-70s. There was nearly 100 tungsten mines around the world outside of China. And by the mid-90s, there were 2 left. Wow. So it was an extremely efficient capture of market share by China. And ultimately, we've been paying the price for that ever since. But there were 2 outposts. One was our Portuguese mine that held on, and another one belongs to Sandvik in Austria. And we built on the back of that. So we have another 2 sites in Spain, and we're now fully under construction of the world's largest tungsten mine in South Korea, which is financed by the German and Austrian governments. And I think ultimately we'll be in a good position to offer a sort of viable diversification for all of our customers. Predominantly, they're all US customers. Most of our company is US. So yeah, I'm a naturalized American, despite the accent. We have our board of directors, our investors. We recognized many years ago the importance of tungsten to the US. And the DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, is the largest supplier of tungsten into the US market, the US stockpile, except that unfortunately, as of this year, end of this year, it'll no longer have any material in it. So they've got to a point where after 20 years of being the primary source for US manufacturers, that is now gone at the end of this year.
Wow. So almost this is not even a case of national security. Sounds like a case of international security if I hear you properly.
Well, I mean, to bring something into sort of current news, if you look in the defense sector and munitions, so whether it be artillery shells, whether it be penetrators, all of the weapons that are currently being employed in the Ukraine, the consumption in the Ukraine has been so vast that they've been consuming at a far greater rate than the world can actually produce, or allied countries can produce. And there's not even the tungsten available for these munitions.
Wow.
It just doesn't exist. So we're really caught in an unusual situation. And going back to what I said at the beginning about price doesn't matter.
Right.
It also creates a very uncomfortable catch-22 for everybody. You know how important tungsten is. You know how it's on your top of your critical metals lists. It's irreplaceable. But you can't really make an enormous amount of noise about it because it's a very scarce metal.
Right.
So lithium and cobalt, we can make lots of noise because it's rare earth. There's lots around. So if you upset the primary source, you know there's alternatives that exist. But in tungsten, that's not the case. Mm-hmm. And you've entered into this unusual situation where 90% of your tungsten comes from two jurisdictions that perhaps you have to defend yourself against at some point in the future.
Understood.
So it's supply, critical supply is actually far more important to the market, but it has to be done very gently for fear of upsetting the hand that feeds you.
No, that makes perfect sense. And hence my thought about the international security from a global standpoint. If the supply gets cut off, then what? So, okay, beautiful. Next question. How do you handle risk, and what are some mistakes you see people make with respect to risk management?
Well, I think in anything you do, there's a level of risk. And the issue is, if you try and avoid risk, you never actually make a decision.
Right.
And I've seen in many instances where decisions are now constructed by committees, which often dilute the decision down to such a point that it's not really a decision. It ceases to be a rule. It's more of a suggestion.
Right.
And that means you languish. But if you look at companies that actually do take the risk, I think obviously the most public one in the US right now is Tesla, for instance.
Right.
You know, they took a golf cart concept and turned it into a desirable, luxury item, which they hope to, in fact, continue to put into a more, affordable vein. But it started a whole movement. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, I don't think anyone said it was a good idea at the start. Of course, now with hindsight, of course, it was a great idea. So I think with risk, you measure you do your analysis and you say, well, how much worse off am I if what I'm deciding to do goes wrong?
Right. And
to also, and I think this is most important, always recognize that it is impossible to always be right.
Wow.
And so,
I love that. Wow.
If you actually make an error, if you actually make a poor decision, never be worried about pivoting. Be aware that the fact that if it does go wrong, don't leave it so long that fixing an issue becomes trying to fix a disaster.
Yeah.
When it first goes wrong, it's just an issue.
Yeah,
fix it.
Yeah.
But if you can't be wrong, you throw money at it. Of course, I'm right. I'm never right. You end up in a death spiral. And that's why most companies fail in the first few years. It's not that the idea wasn't good. It was just their inability to pivot when they weren't right in one area or two areas or three areas. You must always accept that you're going to make mistakes and to address them quickly. Don't let them fester.
Well, so Louis, this is our first time we're meeting, but I wrote a book about investing. It's called Psychological Analysis. It was #1 on Amazon for 2 months. And in it, I have a whole chapter dedicated to risk. And in the show, I've interviewed over 100 people now, CEOs and big money managers. And every once in a while, I get a nice, really nice nugget of wisdom that I just take a note on, mental note. That should have been in the book. So I talk about the risk. And like you said, take small losses much better than they snowball and then get bigger. But the fact that it's impossible to always be right, I think is next level genius. So I want to take a moment and applaud you for that, because that's the whole point of the show, is find those nuggets. And you just gave us one. So thank you very much.
I think, George Steinbrenner from the Yankees said once, you only have to be right once.
So true.
And I think that's really what your expectation in the business. Most businesses, I don't know the statistic, but it's a vast majority, fail very early on.
Yes.
And it's, there's all kinds of, I ran out of money, I did this. At the end of the day, it really comes down to the fact that the idea can be great, but the execution could have been wrong.
100%.
And it's just knowing, okay, I got to pivot. Something wrong with being wrong. What's wrong is when you essentially
stay wrong.
Yeah.
Love it. Okay. What are some timeless lessons? Thank you very much, by the way. That's just next level awesome. What are some timeless lessons you've learned along the way that you'd like to share with the audience?
The greatest gift you'll have over other people is when they underestimate you. So never spend a great deal of time telling everybody how wonderful you are, or how, successful you are, or you never put a bullseye on yourself. People are going to dislike you enough from your own success. And that's inevitable. It's an incredible human failure in my mind, that we actually find delight in criticizing people who have really made a difference.
Yeah.
This never ceases to amaze me. I'm always in awe of people, even if they're not very nice people, they're not very charming or sociable, and that they've been very aggressive to get to that point. I've always had an admiration for somebody who has built something. Right or wrong, it's always, but most people, so I always think, be unassuming. Don't make a big fuss of it. When when the day that if you ever retire, which again is not a great idea, that's another thing I don't think is a good idea. Generally, retirement brings age.
Yes.
You need people who build need aggravation. You need constant drama. From me, I'm a public company, so I'm constantly getting criticism from your retail shareholders. This isn't going and that isn't going, and it's not happening quick enough. And there's a lot of things that you cannot share because you're operating only in democracies. So you have to be very aware of, NGOs, and that mines, let's be perfectly honest, are not exactly vote-winning strategies for politicians. So you have to navigate through a bureaucratic regulatory system. But keep a low profile. Don't sing your praises. Really, it's not worth the drama.
I couldn't agree with you more. Wow, this is really, really good. Quickly turning to one of my favorite episodes that we've done so far. All right, next question. What are some timeless mistakes, Lewis, you'd like to share with the audience that you've made or you've seen other people make, and how do you avoid them?
Well, I can't really talk about other people's mistakes because I don't really know if they were a mistake or that was deliberate. So you never really know. For me, yes, I've made lots of mistakes. But I try and tell myself never to regret that mistake. But there's always a part of you that says, I wish I hadn't done that. I think the key to a mistake is that you have to see it as the cost of your education. You must learn from that mistake. Where it becomes stupidity is when you keep making the same mistake.
Yes.
A mistake is okay. It's just part of the learning process.
Yeah.
It's just, it's the cost of your education. Am I smarter now than I was 10 years ago? I wouldn't say smarter, I'd say wiser.
Yes.
I think it's a better way to put it. Do I continue to make mistakes? Every day, there's always something.
Me too.
But I think I don't make the same mistake. And in mining, you make a mistake. Oh my goodness, it can be a big number. So you just try and learn from them. I try and measure a good day that I've made, good decisions more than I've made poor ones. I've had more wins than losses.
Yes.
And that keeps me moving forward.
I love that.
That to me is the key.
Bigger wins than losses, right? Even that's
you have more wins than losses, so that you ended up in credit in the day.
Yeah, that's
And
great.
that to me means that if I can do that on a weekly basis, the company continues to move forward, albeit probably slower than everyone would like. But I'm also a great believer that every great company is not built in a year.
Right.
And that's something which I think we lose sight of, especially as an investor.
Yes.
That we think things can be miracles in 1, 2, 3 years. If you look at the Apples, the Teslas, all these companies, they didn't even really start to get any note in the first 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's a process. The good news about slowly moving forward is that you're building behind you a really strong base. And that foundation is going to see you through the lean times as well as the good times.
Love that. So let's talk about leadership. What makes a great leader, and what are some lessons you've learned about leadership?
Well, firstly, common sense is not hugely popular. So I think that to expect people to understand things from a common sense perspective is probably a little overly ambitious. I think as a manager, you have to really find your inner psychoanalyst, because you have to understand how to motivate people on a regular and continuous basis.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't expect them to perform or to the levels that you would like them to. You should measure your expectations. But the most important thing to me is a strong moral background in a company. And I know that sounds very old-fashioned, but I think good manners are free. And you don't have to like everybody.
Yeah.
You don't have to hang out with everybody and all be friends and go paintballing together. But you have to respect each other.
Right.
And that means also that those good manners and that good moral way of basically behaving, how you run your life, extends to outside of work as well. It means that you're not chasing the interns. You're not.
Yeah.
I know it sounds very old-fashioned, but I think good manners in a company really means that we have a very low turnover of staff in our company, because it's a community.
Right.
Because they know that I understand and respect mistakes because we can address them.
Yes.
But I don't with poor behavior.
Right.
And I found over the years, people like being in that environment.
Yes. So true. I love that. That is so, so powerful. So it's almost as if you encourage mistakes, but you rather somebody make a mistake than behave poorly, because poor behavior is inexcusable. Making mistakes is the cost of education. It's part of the success.
To err is human. Ultimately the manager is only as good as the methods that they provide to the company to alleviate mistakes. That, as I explained in the management meetings, there's no such thing as good news and bad news. There's just news. And so when you go through everything, even if they think it's bad news, it could actually be good news. Right. But unless it's all transparent, there's no way of addressing it. The worst thing you can do if you cut your leg is just to put your pants over it and forget about it.
Right.
You have to treat it.
You have to.
Before they got to cut your leg off.
Right.
It's just, that's life. I mean, my understanding is that, infallibility is not in our makeup. So management meetings, people have to have the strength in their relationships on everyone in that meeting, because of good manners, because of respect for each other, to be transparent. Right. Every division is going to have an issue at one point. It's just where it is. And it gives us all an opportunity to resolve it.
I love that. So to explain your analogy to the audience, you could say rain. Is rain good or bad? Is it good news, bad news? It depends on your perspective, right? Because if there's a drought and you want rain for the crops and whatever, great, it's good news. If you want to go suntanning and go to the beach that day, it's bad news. Yeah, but it's just news.
It's just news. I mean, and the thing is, the same applies for the good decisions. Right. So, you can make a decision as one department, but you have to understand the knock-on effect to the other departments of that decision. So that transparency is very important. Somebody can say, yep, that's a great idea, but if we do that, this is going to happen. So I think It's a question. I will always, engage with all personnel all the way through the entire company, from the highest manager all the way down to the guy operating, the loaders.
Yeah.
Because ultimately they all have a contribution, every single one of them.
Right.
What I won't stand for is bad manners,
Right.
because this, to me, is a cancer in a company.
Agreed.
If a company, I remember my old soccer coach when I was 7 years old. I used to have all my socks would always go down at my ankles, and he always made me pull them up. And he'd say, "If you look the part, you play the part."
Right.
And I've always did hear that. I want the project kept clean. I want those plants spotless. I don't want garbage left underground. I want everything. I want people to respect their environment.
Yes.
And that way they respect each other. And that's always been, and I've been accused of, by some competitors who say, "Oh, he's always going on about keeping a plant clean." Well, with a plant, if it's clean, you can see a problem much quicker than it's dirty. If you've got a leak somewhere, you've got something. I mean, it's just common sense. That's all. It costs you a little bit more money,
right?
But people then have, they take pride in what they do.
100%, because you're empowering them to create their environment too, which is also very, very powerful.
Absolutely. I mean, they don't go home to a dirty living room.
Right, exactly.
Why would work be any different?
Right. Sense, yeah.
And also some of our facilities are outdoors, so the plants are outdoors, or open pit mines, and so even things where we have have winters, we have snow, so silly things like, for instance, we always provide in the changing rooms, in the canteens, we always provide for the snacks, we provide fruit. Crazy as that may be, yes, it's all very nice, it's healthy, but the fact is that it keeps people more resilient to colds and flus during the winter, because I need them to work. It's just small things, constantly thinking about improving the environment that people work in.
Love that. Okay, next question. Adversity. How do you handle adversity, and what are some obstacles that you've had to overcome that you'd like to share with the audience, please?
Well, I take everything personally, which is, I try not to, but it's my nature.
Right.
So I tend to find that when, I'm surrounded by all kinds of people who want to take strips off you all the time. Yeah. And there's, for a moment, for that second, I take it personally. And then I kind of, take a deep breath and realize that, that's just how people are.
Yeah.
You have to keep emotion out of the decision-making process. You have to know that the way you conduct your life is not necessarily how they're going to conduct their life.
Right.
And they're going to do things that they feel they have to do for whatever reason. You can't second guess why it is. So you have to rely and trust on the basis that the truth will set you free. And that no matter what people say about you, that as long as you stay on the right path, on a path that is honest and transparent, ultimately you'll be successful. And that don't let these people try and derail the way that you work, because they seem to do it in a more, a faster, more aggressive way. But in 10 years, I'll still be here.
Yeah, they're out. Yeah,
that's really the difference. So that's I think for me the most difficult is that for a moment I always take it personally.
And then you let it go, like you bring out.
You can't let that come into your decision-making process.
Wow, that's so powerful. If you summarize my book in one sentence, it's literally that. It's to make rational decisions, not emotional ones. So I absolutely love that. Okay, finally, best piece of advice you'd like to share with the audience or your 30-year-old self.
With my 30-year-old self is trust the process. It'll all be okay. It just, and I think to anyone, they're starting or they're building a business or they're thinking of doing a business, the most important criteria for a business is the passion you put into it. there's a very good chance that that passion will never translate into an enormous amount of money. Money should not be the factor for doing it.
Right.
Because when you're motivated by that, you can't really single yourself out from others.
Right.
Your passion is what makes the difference. That's what people buy into, nothing else.
Yep.
You know, and that passion, that fire is going to be, you know, under threat through your entire career. There are going to be days when you get up and say, oh, you know, this again.
Yeah.
But you have to remind yourself why you did it. You got to remind yourself, you know, that you continue to do it, and to show the same level of passion and commitment from the day you started to the day you finish.
I love it. That is so, so powerful. So earlier, Louis, you mentioned the difference between passion and a course. So question for you, look, when you're, you know, follow your passion, but make sure you're on the course. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
A course is a journey that you think you know where it's going to go. So you say, if I do X, I'm going to get to Y.
Yeah.
You plan your journey.
Okay.
And with a passion, there's no way to plan that journey. That passion will bring all kinds of different journeys on its way. You'll have no, and that's important. Don't plan for how you're going to get to the finish line. Yes. Know that your passion will ultimately mean that your journey will never end.
Right.
There is no finish line. At what point do you say, that's it? I've achieved what I set out to do. With a passion, there is no end. It's a passion. Right. With a course, there's an end.
And it's so powerful. It's almost like the mindset of an infinite game versus a finite game, right? Yeah. So yeah, the stock market.
If you like playing soccer,
yeah,
why would you ever stop playing soccer?
Exactly.
You know, yeah. you know, it's just it's just, you know, you don't win one game and say, oh, that's it, I'm done.
Yeah, exactly.
You keep doing it until the body says, man, you can't do it anymore. But even when you're in your 50s and you still like to kick around, you play in your pub team. You know, it's a passion. It's the same with work.
Yep. Yeah, I love it. Well, Louis, that's an excellent way to end the show. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Hopefully we'll have you on again soon. The ticker symbol or the stock is Almonty. They're on the Toronto, US exchanges, and Germany as well.
And so, ASX, Australia.
And the ASX in
Our
Australia.
friends down under.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Adam. Take care.